Welcome back to another class of React. So, first topic we want to learn today is about asynchronous operations in React and in general JavaScript. If you remember from our previous lessons, we have built a list of fruits which we display, and this list we can get it from database. How we can get it from the database is by calling the API which stores this entries of fruits, which essentially reads this entries of fruits from database and then displaying them on the user screen. So for that we use effect hook, another another handy use of use effect, where it is able to do the side effect work of calling the API and grabbing the list of fruits. So we are grabbing the list of fruits and then displaying on the UI. How we can verify that we are calling an API is, let's refresh our uh, page and have our network tab open. So when you see the network tab, we are calling the API which is listed in our React code, and this API is responding us back with an array which contains a list of fruit and ID associated with the fruit. We are using this list and displaying the fruits using the map function that we have seen in past. This is a straightforward operation, and um, this is quite an important operation that you will be doing quite a few number of times during your actual work in industry. So this is an important concept. We call an API and then we get the details from the API and then we display the result on the screen. There are other ways to do asynchronous operations in React, and we will shortly see this. But before that, let's look at the quite a neat little trick of how to show certain elements on the screen conditionally. So we are displaying the list of fruits here, but what if the list of fruits were not available? How we can simulate that is just bringing our database and our APIs down. So let's do that. Let's close our APIs real quick, and from now let's refresh our page, and we see a failure of our of fruit list API being called, and we are seeing that there are no fruits to show. How we are seeing that? Well, if you look at the line 62 to 64, we are conditionally checking if the fruits array has a length greater than 0, and originally we are initializing it as an empty array, so it has a length of 0. So if it's greater than 0, then we are showing the list of fruits, this phrase, and if it is equal to 0, we are showing this phrase, there are no fruits to show. Well, that's very cool trick, using a condition which evaluates to a boolean value, we can show one or the other detail. This list, this uh, phrase could have been a like full-fledged React component instead of just a p tag. You could imagine this being anything that you wish to have. Now there is another cool way to conditionally just show one thing. Here we are showing two things, a phrase A or phrase B. But if you look at line 66 to 68, we are saying that only if fruit length is greater than 0, then show which fruit you would like to filter, this phrase. Now if we go back to our UI, we do not have that phrase, which fruit you want to filter. So here, only when the fruit list will be greater than 0, we will show. So let's bring our API back and see this in action. So our APIs are back. Let's quickly refresh our application, and now we are seeing that instead of no fruits to show, we are showing list of fruits, and we are showing the phrase which is given in the code 66 line 66 to line 68. Very cool and very nice way to conditionally render or not render certain things on the our UI. Now, till now, we have only dealt with a list of fruits, and they are just only one kind of property, which is just name of fruits. But often enough in the real world, you will be dealing with related entities which have some sort of relation. So think of a username, a user. So user will have a username. Maybe they'll have a credit card information. Maybe they'll have a address. They'll have a phone number and everything that you could imagine. Let's say when you sign up on Amazon. So this entities, if we continue to use state uh, like this, we would have like quite a few number of entries like this. Maybe one entry for username and set username, and then say user address and set user address. Now only with just two things we can see that this code is becoming inefficient, and it is very hard for us to tell that both of these state variables denote to or represent a single entity which is a single user. To do that, to create that relation where it's more objectively objectively connected uh, properties of a single object, we can use something called uh, use uh, use reduce. So yeah, use reducer hook, which allows combining multiple uh, related related entities, as I mentioned before. Let me really quickly remove this. So to learn that, I have created a small update to our code where I have added a user profile management piece. With user profile management, we can do is update the username, or maybe let's say update the user address, whatnot, and then we can display the updated thing on UI. To do that, we use reducer hook, and use reducer hook takes an reducer which essentially tells React how to update different values that are related to one single object, and what is the initial value of that object. So let's quickly look at that. Uh, Here we have a user whose initial state is name is John Doe and email is john at example.com, and there are a couple of other related values where, let's say if you're fetching this detail from a database we saw is loading, or a spinner you might have seen a lot of times, and moreover we have error state as well. So this is the initial value, and the reducer that I was telling is nothing but how this value should be updated. So a reducer is a special function that takes the state value, the current state value of the user, and then an action. Action is nothing but what you want to do. So start profile update is like you're starting the profile update. Then there's another action called update user, which is updating our current user to a new user. Then you could have individual actions on a single thing. This is the action on line 33 updates the entire user, whereas we are on the action on the line 40 is for uh, just updating the name, so on and so forth. And based on what action the reducer function receives, uh, the corresponding state update happens. So let me recap what I just explained again. Use reducer hook is used to group related uh, entities of a single object together, and like we are seeing here, which is like a user name and email, and use reducer hook takes two arguments. One is a reducer function and one is initial state. So this is the initial value of our user, and use reducer. Now you use reducer function, or the reducer function is a special function which again takes two different arguments, uh, a current state, which could be a maybe a modified name, and an action. Action tells how do you want to modify the current state. So we have seen maybe we assign it the entirely new user, or we just change the name. So let's look at this in action. Let me remove the commenting of the code that I have done it earlier and refresh our UI. And now we see the username and email being displayed here. Before I jump into how to update the user details using the reducer and the actions, I want to touch base on another core concept which is not just pivotal to React but to the whole JavaScript as well, which is the promises. Promises in JavaScript are bindings which in a way guarantees an outcome. Now that outcome could be a good outcome or a bad outcome. We have seen promise previously. While not saying it explicitly a promise, the fetch function itself returns a promise where it says that, hey, I'm giving you a binding that I will give you a data, or I will give you an error. We saw that when we looked at our fruit list. We can use similar logic for updating our users detail. Is Here is a function where update of the user profile is happening with a new name and new email, and we are dispatching a new action which is start profile update. Now start profile update will typically call an API which we are simulating here, and randomly it will say I was successful, or it will say update failed. So this is an explicit use of promise, which is a binding which either gives you a success or a failure, but it gives you something back. It will not hang you in, but the promise will happen on its own time. So here we are telling that do this action after 1 second. Now this could have been anything. A promise, for example, calling an API could have different time value, as in case of a fetch function here. We are not mentioning any time value. So let's say if you're on a fast internet, on a really high speed internet, this would be in milliseconds or less than a second. Whereas let's say you're traveling in the car, and you are on a mobile network, fetching the fruit list might take maybe 10 seconds. So a promise after certain amount of time gives you either a failure or a rejection. So in randomly we are failing, we are just randomly doing randomly passing or rejecting the promise, and again we are updating the value in use reducer hook using actions that are triggered on the reducer function, and the trigger happens using another um, function which the use reducer hook provides us, which is conveniently we call it as dispatch. So think of it as we are dispatching an action of maybe changing username on the reducer, and then that dispatch does its job. So a lot of things, and if you guys feel you are confused on this, feel free to reach out to me on Slack or book a one-on-one session, because this can get a little confusing, but once you get hang of it, it is really intuitive. So let's see this in action. Let's We are randomly going to try to update this update profile button. If you go back to the code, update profile is trying to update the uh, name to Jan Doe, and an email to jan@example.com. And remember, we are randomly failing this action or passing this action. So let's do this. Update the profile. We'll click and it says update failure. So it says John Doe and and email says John Doe at example.com. Let's try again. And now the success. We received a success. So this is a random behavior that I have added in the code to understand both the states, where now we went from John Doe to Jane Doe via firing an action on our reducer. Let me show you. Dispatching an action on our reducer, which is update user with new name and new email, which was Jan Doe and Jan at example.com. Final topic of today is, let me refresh. We need a failure here. The final topic of today is, there are instances in React where something together will never happen, and that is called impossible states. What do I mean by that is, you could not have an update failed as well as name change to Jando and Jane at example.com. So that is called an impossible state. Two contradicting state values which should not exist together are called impossible states. And if you run into such impossible state, that means there is a bug in your code and you should look to correct it. So with that, it concludes our session for today. We covered asynchronous React, conditional rendering in React, advanced state using use reducer, which I would say again is a bit complex, so don't feel shy to reach out, and then impossible state, which is quite self-explanatory, where two contradicting state values should not exist together. Thank you, everyone. Bye.